This is ContraZoom, where we go back and forth about film. I'm your host, Dakota Arsenault. The nominations for the Canadian Screen Awards, which celebrate the best in Canadian film, TV, and digital media, were announced this past week. And as regular listeners of the show know, I love Canadian cinema. Joining me is one of the only other people I know who love Canadian films as much as I do, and that is Jeff Balmer, one half of the Classic Movies Live podcast, frequent contributor to ContraZoomPod.com, and who was last heard on episode 302, Best Films of 2024, where he sent in a voicemail talking about how Paying for It was one of his favorite movies from last year, a topic that will be coming up again plenty today. How are you doing today, Jeff?
I'm doing all right, and Paying for It. I mean, people will hear us talk about it. You know, not nearly enough love for it, and it's a movie that I think has been getting a lot of love, so needs more.
Yeah.
If you can see it, go see it.
Last year, we recorded our reactions after the awards came out, and we sort of talked about a bunch of movies, Canadian movies that way. And this year, we decided to take it a step further and react to both the nominations, where we could sort of highlight what movies are on our radar, and maybe some nominations we wished had come out. And then after the awards take place, we will once again recap them that way. But we decided to do something a little bit differently as well this year by predicting what would be nominated for Best Motion Picture and who the other big players of the awards might be. I'm going to now throw to a pre-recorded segment that we recorded the night before the nominations came out. So let's see how we did. So it is the night before the Canadian Screen Awards come out, the nominations, come out. And so it's Tuesday, March 25th. And Jeff and I thought it'd be fun to just maybe predict who we think is going to be the big players. This sort of came from a conversation of, in preparation for us reacting to the nominations, we were like, oh, what do you think the big players are going to be? And texting back and forth. And Jeff had this great idea of maybe we just try to predict things a little bit. I feel like you were doing lots of prep, and if you want to kind of talk about what our methodology is sort of looking like in terms of blindly picking things out of thin air, I think you have a pretty good idea of how to word this.
Yeah, the Canadian Screen Awards, very much unlike the Oscars or the Indie Spirits even, or the Golden Globes. There's not a lot of people that predict these, or at least that predict nominations, so there's a lot fewer precursors to go on. Like, there aren't awards that come out before that are good indicators of what's going to be deemed the best in Canadian film. So I was just sort of like thinking, what could even be considered a precursor? And even the ones I came up with are definitely not perfect. The Oscars are a precursor because they come out earlier. I mean, they happen before the CSAs, and Canadian movies are technically eligible for the Oscars, though most of the movies that could maybe be considered Canadian at the Oscars usually wouldn't by the CSA standards. There's the Quebec Cinema Awards, which would definitely overlap a lot more with the CSAs, but they also have a very different eligibility period. So a lot of things that were at the Quebec Cinema Awards, those happen in December. A lot of movies that won there or that were even nominated were also nominated at last year's Canadian Screen Awards. So they're like precursors for each other almost. And then there's TIFF's Canada's Top 10, which is a series that they do every year at the TIFF Bell Lightbox. But that's also just personal programmer picks, most of which aired at TIFF. That's not a requirement for them, but that's usually kind of where they pick from. And even then, that's only 10 movies. And the Canadian Screen Awards, as we'll talk about probably tomorrow, for anyone listening to this later, they have a lot of categories. So 10 movies, there's going to be way more than 10 movies nominated. I can't remember how many there were last year, but it was like minimum 3 dozen. There's a lot of movies nominated.
Yeah, I think the best place to start is probably the TIFF Top 10. So I'm going to run through that really quickly. I'll just say the name of the movie and the director. So we've got 40 Acres, directed by R.T. Thorne. Any Other Way, the Jackie Shane story, directors Luca Rosenberg Lee and Michael Mabbitt. Can I Get a Witness, directed by Anne Marie Fleming. Matt and Mara, directed by Kazik Radwanski. Paying for It, directed by Sukin Lee. Rumors, directed by Guy Madden, Evan Johnson, and Galen Johnson. And Seeds, I'm gonna butcher how you say her name. Directed by Kenny Hitio Horn. I apologize.
I
Shepherd.
think it's Ganatio.
There we go. Thank you so much. Shepherds, directed by Sophie Darasp. And The Shrouds, directed by David Cronenberg. Oh, and then lastly, Universal Language, directed by Matthew Rankin. Yeah, so I think, it's tough. Like you were saying, there isn't very many precursors or things like that. And like even just trying to Google best Canadian films of the year, you basically just get a list of movies that came out. So there's nothing like the Oscars where it's, you've got sites like Gold Derby and the Hollywood Reporter and all these other websites that aggregate how other award shows are doing and things like that. This is very unique, and like there are different stuff, like you get like the Toronto Film Critics Group and the Vancouver Film Critics Group and the film festivals itself. They all release their best films and things like that, and they'll do their own awards and things like that. But it's still it's very difficult because it's very regionally based and very niche, and this is a niche thing that we both really like and appreciate. So it's fun, and even looking at the trying to just predict best picture, I think we've got a handful of movies. They do 6 movies a year for the Best Picture nomination, Best Motion Picture. And I think there's maybe 15 or so movies that are in play, and that doesn't even include the fact that I don't even know what were the big French films from last year. I only know of like 2 of the big French films.
Yeah, even for Best Picture, I think it's like in my head, it's really competitive. They nominate 6, and I have 8 that I wrote in my list and like scratched out a couple, and even then, I can't like fully decide on a 6.
Yeah, that's really fair. Okay, so you know what? For posterity purposes, you and I are each going to name what the 6 movies we think are going to be nominated for Best Picture. So I'll start with mine, and mine are Universal Language, Shepherds, Matt and Mara, 1995, Paying for It, My Old Ass. This is definitely a hard one to say. I only have, I guess, 2.5 French films here. Shepherds, 1995, and Universal Language is half French, half Farsi. It's mostly Farsi. And you look at the history of the Canadian Screen Awards, and last year, 4 of the 6 films were French, and the year before, 3 of the 6 films were French. So we're definitely, I feel like we're going to be missing some French films that sort of feel like they're coming out of nowhere. What about you? What's your top 6 that you are sort of leaning on?
My list is very close to yours, but not identical. I have Paying for It, Shepherds, The Shrouds, My Old Ass, 1995, and Universal Language. And I just at the last minute switched out, put in My Old Ass and took out Rumors. So like I said, there's 7 that I'm like, I don't know where exactly I want to put them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're basically just replacing The Shrouds in Matt and Mara on my list.
Yes,
Okay.
I think Matt and Mara is going to be represented. I don't think it's going to be Best Picture, but I could see it.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah. I feel like the locks are probably Universal Language, Shepherds, Paying for It, and maybe 1995.
I'm not confident in calling 1995 a lock. I've just been hyping it up so much for myself, and I know that I've been doing that to you too. So I actually, but I also do know that it did fairly well, at least in terms of nominations at the Quebec Cinema Awards, and it's one of very few movies that was at the Quebec Cinema Awards in December and was not eligible at last year's CSAs. So that's kind of why I'm putting it there.
Yeah, and I look at a movie like Seven Veils, which actually made TIFF's top 10 list 2 years ago. I guess not 1 year ago.
Actually?
Yeah, yeah. But it didn't get any nominations last year at the CSAs, so I would assume it was not eligible last year. I don't quite know what the eligibility period looks like in terms of how it needs to be released, where it needs to be released, things like that. I'm guessing because it played at TIFF 2 years ago, it was eligible for the TIFF top 10 list. So I am just not too sure. And that's one that I think could be a sneaky player. And I'm just realizing that now. But I made a list of a whole bunch of other films that could be in play. What are some of the other ones? You mentioned you had Rumors there in your top six. Anything else that might be in contention for Best Picture?
Well, I just want to say really quickly, I think we're both going to be kicking ourselves later in this episode when we didn't put Seven Veils as a lock. Because now that you mentioned it, yeah, that's absolutely a lock for Best Picture, in my opinion.
Yeah.
As long as it is eligible, which I do believe it is, but the eligibility periods are weird and I don't fully understand them, even though I have read through them. I got to read through it again.
I think some other notable films that could be in contention for Best Picture. We've got 40 Acres, which I mentioned was on the list. Same with Any Other Way, the Jackie Shane story. They normally don't put a documentary in the Best Picture category, but who knows? It seemed to garner a lot of love and attention. Maybe Inedia, which was a Vancouver-based film. Mongrels, that was also a Vancouver one. The Mother and the Bear was from Winnipeg. You mentioned Rumors. The Silent Planet, I believe, is eligible. That's a Quebec film that I really liked. Sugarcane, which was actually an Oscar nominee for documentary. Once again, I don't know how strong they're going to go into documentaries. And then I don't think it's a player for Best Picture, but one I hope sort of shows up is Young Werther. Is there any that I missed there that you think could be a Best Picture player potentially?
I actually kind of think that the documentaries you mentioned won't be Best Picture players because I think that the Canadian Screen Awards fully separates out documentaries. But I think the only one that wasn't on your list that I do want to mention is Humane by Caitlin Cronenberg. I have not seen it, and the reviews that I've heard of it have been mixed to positive, but it is a Cronenberg film.
Yep.
So, I feel like there's going to be Cronenberg representation. The Shrouds will get in for something, but I wouldn't want to bet. I wouldn't want to. I would feel weird closing out this segment without mentioning all the Cronenberg films.
Yeah. I have seen it. I wonder if it's maybe going to be a player for maybe some of the acting or technical stuff. I don't know if it's good enough to crack the top six.
Right.
Speaking of that, is there any sort of either performances or maybe screenplays or things like that that sort of stand out to you that you are really hoping ends up getting a nomination?
So this is one that I don't know if it's eligible, but whenever I look up notable Canadian films from 2024, The Apprentice comes up.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's eligible, but if it is, Sebastian Stan was easily, far and away, my number one pick for Best Actor at the Oscars. I would think I would love it if he could get another chance at the CSAs.
Yeah, it sort of seems like every year there's one movie that you're like, really, this Hollywood film is considered Canadian? Okay. I think last year probably the closest. I wouldn't say Blackberry because it was definitely feeling very Canadian. I would say maybe Infinity Pool. Speaking of Cronenberg progeny, that was sort of the surprise of that's Canadian enough to qualify. Okay, so yeah, I agree with you. I wonder if that's going to count or whether voters will go for it or not. It's going to be interesting to see. I could definitely see it maybe getting a token. Maybe lead performance and supporting performance because the CSAs do not separate by gender. Maybe we get a Jeremy Strong and Sebastian Stan nomination.
Yeah, and that's one where I think if it's eligible and they go for it, it'll appear everywhere.
Yeah.
And if they don't go for it or it isn't eligible, it's just not going to be there.
Yeah.
I feel like that's one that's either going to get a lot of nominations or basically none.
Yeah.
Not even basically none. None.
Universal language, I really think it's going to show up strongly in a lot of categories, except for I don't think the performance categories because it feels like an ensemble and no one really takes the lead, and I don't know if anyone stands out enough in the supporting world to crack it there. But I could definitely see universal language showing up in picture, director, screenplay, everything really.
I wouldn't want to count out the guy who plays Masood
Hmm.
for supporting actor. To me, he's the one that really stands out in that movie, and I do think that he stands out enough in a supporting performance, and I think there's 10 spots for supporting. So I do think that he could like get a nomination there.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. Um, Probably both the leads in Matt and Mara will get in, I imagine.
Yeah, I'd
Uh,
actually be surprised if they didn't.
yeah, yeah, that feels like a very strong CSA nomination for the two of them there. And paying for it, you're probably the biggest advocate of that. You recorded a voicemail for my best films of the year episode, talking about how much you love that. How many categories are you expecting paying for it to show up in?
I expect that one to show up in a lot. I think that's going to be one of the big, like, strong best pictures. I think that and Shepherds are going to appear pretty much everywhere.
Yeah.
I think Paying for It is going to have at least both acting categories, possibly supporting actress too. And then definitely for screenwriting and probably for a bunch of technicals as well. I don't know; those might be like token technicals, but it didn't stand out specifically to me in any particular area, except that it is a very well made film, so I can see it going for a lot of those. And like kind of the same with Shepherds. I think that Shepherds is competitive in all those same categories as well.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
And paying for it, it is technically a period piece. It does take place in the late 90s, early 2000s, and the aesthetic really works in that. So I wouldn't be surprised. One thing I do like about the Canadian Screen Awards is the fact that you can have these best makeup and best hair nominations, best wardrobe, where it actually is not about like who did the best Elizabethan costumes or crazy monster makeup that the Oscars and other awards like that normally feature. It's what's appropriate for the film, what works for that. And I think Paying for It is probably going to perform really well there. Shepherds is probably one of the most competently made films from last year, regardless of Canadian or not, just in how gorgeous it looks. So I agree with you. I think it's going to show up in a lot of places. One I'm really hoping for is In a Violent Nature. That was a movie both you and I were a fan of. You turned me on to that one. Honestly, if it even just gets in for best makeup, I think that's going to be a huge win. I could see that being like the token nomination it gets. I don't know if it's going to get anything else. I would love for it to show up in cinematography or maybe one of the sound categories, but that might be asking for a little bit too much.
Yeah, I wrote down in my hope to sees, I want to see a lot for In a Violent Nature personally. My dream would be if it could hit director. That would
Mm,
be amazing. But
yeah,
I don't expect that. But I think that like if it hits cinematography, it'll be competitive there. I think it's got incredible cinematography.
yeah.
And I would really like to see it show up there.
Rumors, that was one I was a big fan of. I can see this movie potentially being completely blanked as well because I think it's such a weird movie that I wonder if the voters will even go for it because I know it received a very mixed reaction on the festival circuit.
I'm gonna make here's my wild prediction, just because I think we're coming to the end of predictions here.
Hmm.
I think that Rumors is gonna I think its most notable nomination is gonna be Best Supporting Actor for the guy who plays not Trudeau.
Yep. Yeah. And then I think the last one I want to talk about is Young Werther, a film that I really appreciated and would love Douglas Booth, Alison Pill, and even Patrick J. Adams to kind of show up in the acting categories. I thought that was just such a well-made film. Speaking of great costumes, I hope it shows up in best costumes too, because that was a delightful little film for me.
It's one that's really notable for not being a period piece, but still kind of embodies the spirit of it, which I think is really interesting.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. It takes the fact that it's based on a book from several hundred years ago, transplants it to today, but it keeps the vibe of both.
And I guess one film we haven't talked about yet, and I don't know if you've seen, one thing I would really, really like to see show up in acting especially is Darkest Miriam. That's a movie I don't know if you've seen. It came out at Fantasia Fest last year, and I think it's just hit theaters this month. The lead actress in that, whose name unfortunately escapes me, very, very good in that. And I would really like to see her show up. That would be really cool.
Yeah, you did a review out of Fantasia Festival for the website where you talked about, and yeah, I noticed it's just coming out, but I have not seen it. So these are our pre-predictions for the Canadian Screen Awards. You're about to hear us reacting to the actual nominations in a moment. So hopefully we didn't make ourselves look too foolish here today. Well, that went terribly, didn't it, Jeff?
Oh yeah, we did real bad.
Real bad. Looking at just the best motion picture category, we both only got one film right in universal language, with you throwing out Darkest Miriam as a dark horse. So yeah, that was not good on our part.
I'm a little surprised actually that Darkest Miriam not only is there but seems to be like a heavy hitter this year too.
Yeah.
I I would say that's a pleasant surprise. And in general, I think that how weird this best motion picture lineup is a pleasant surprise. It doesn't have a lot of movies that I liked on it, clearly, as everyone will have just heard, but it has a lot that I haven't seen, so I want to give them all a chance, obviously.
Well, speaking of that, how many of the nominated movies have you seen? I'm currently at 14 out of 74, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you consider that a lot of these movies only have one nomination, which is why you can get up to 74, this is still very difficult to do as a death race, way more difficult than the Oscar death race, which we do every year. This year, there was only 50 nominated films, and that included 15 short films as well. So yeah, where are you at right now?
Also, just to add on to that, the Canadian Screen Awards have a lot more awards too. Just when it comes to like feature length narrative films,
Mm-hmm.
it's already a lot more awards because they do things like splitting up hair and makeup. But they also have an entire set of awards just for documentaries, and significantly more awards that are devoted specifically to shorts and like performances in shorts,
Yes.
which is cool. But looking at it, it's really neat that so many people can get recognized with these nominations and then eventually wins. It seems excessive, but also I don't work in the industry, so I don't benefit from this. So I can't speak to how it must feel to get nominated for 13 Canadian Screen Awards.
Yeah.
Anyway, my point being, I have watched 18 out of 73 so far,
Wow. Yeah, you
or
are.
74, 74.
Yeah, you are very high up. I know in the Oscar Death Race server that you and I are both in. You posted your letterbox list that you made that we will be plugging several times here. And everyone's like, wow, I've only seen 2 movies. Wow, I saw 3 movies. I jump in with, I've seen 14 and you have 18. So like we are way ahead of the game compared to everyone else. That is, I think, the fact that we've now been paying attention to these awards for a couple years. We also are trying to watch these films at festivals because for the most part, that's the only time you can watch these films. If you don't catch it at TIFF or Hot Docs or VIFF or whatever other local film festival you have, there is very few of these you will ever be able to see.
I think of the nominees for Best Motion Picture, I believe one had a proper wide release. That
Yeah.
I could be wrong on that because I'm not looking at stats here, but The Apprentice I know had a proper wide release. Darkest Miriam and Universal Language had like very limited releases, and I don't even know about the other three.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, just quickly off the top, Universal Language leads the pack with 13 nominations, followed by The Shrouds with 9, Diener 89, and Village Keeper with 7 apiece, Darkest Miriam and Seven Veils with 6 each, and other notable films with multiple nominations include The Apprentice, that's right, the Donald Trump movie, Paying for It, Humane, Rumors, Seed, and Matt and Mara, among others. Let's look at the Best Motion Picture. This is the big category. They've got 6 nominees here, as opposed to most other award shows that do 5. And we've got The Apprentice, Darkest Miriam, Gamma Rays, Universal Language, Village Keeper, and Who Do I Belong To? Out of these, I've only seen Universal Language and The Apprentice, so I've got some serious homework to do. You reviewed Darkest Miriam out of Fantasia, I believe it was, last year when it came out. And the other 3 I've not seen. You've just seen those 3, right?
Yeah, I've just seen those 3. I know that I will be seeing Who Do I Belong To pretty soon here, and I hadn't heard of Village Keeper or Gamma Rays before this, so I gotta see if those are somewhere. or if they're coming out. Hopefully, they're already out in some form that I can rent them. But like,
Hmm.
might have to go to a theater. I had to go to a theater for Queen of My Dreams last year, but that was worth it.
Yeah.
So maybe Village Keeper is one I gotta go out. I gotta go out and find. Gamma Rays looks like a Quebec film, which means it probably played for one night in the TIFF Lightbox, and I missed it because I wasn't paying attention.
Yeah. Village Keeper is playing out in Vancouver for a couple nights. The VIF Center is doing all month long. I think they're doing Canadian movies, and Village Keeper is one of them that's going to get a couple screenings. So if I'm available on those nights, I am definitely going to try to see that, since it does have so many nominations, especially in the Best Picture category.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, as you sort of heard us talking about our pre-recorded segment, the types of movies we thought were going to be nominated did not show up here, which is, very shocking. No Shepherds, no Matt and Mara, no 1995, Paying for It, My Old Ass, 40 Acres. I feel like I'm probably missing a couple other ones that like realistically stood a chance of maybe being here. Even Rumors, I thought might have had a shot too. None of that is here. Even The Shrouds, which ended up with the second most nominations, isn't here. What do you think of what happened? Basically, is I'm trying to formulate this question. What happened with our predictions that we were so off? Do you think?
Well, I think we did say it in the predictions part. It's real. There are no accepted precursors for the CSAs, at least not that I'm aware of. So, like, I just have no idea what the voting body of the CSAs is like, what they go for, what they try to do with these nominations. I like, you know, I'm not saying, and even with any awards voting body, with any body where there are people involved, there's like some agenda. And I'm not saying that it's like, oh, none of these deserve to be here. It's all political. I mean, agenda, in as far as like, you're playing to an audience of however many voters. What do those voters go for typically? And I have no idea how to read that here. I think like there's this idea that's very popular of like Oscar bait, which is, varying levels of true. Probably most things people would describe as Oscar bait really aren't, but you can but the whole fact that that's a thing that exists means that you can kind of get a sense of what you think Oscar voters are going to go for.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea what CSA voters go for. So, I think I think we just got unlucky. I think that we, 5 years from now, when we've been doing CSA predictions for 5-6 years, we'll probably move from getting one and maybe a half right, because I think you and I both said maybe The Apprentice if it's eligible.
Yes.
So like
Yeah.
both of us kind of got two right.
Mm-hmm.
In 6 years, maybe we'll get three and a half right.
Yeah, I think one thing that's very interesting about the Canadian film industry is, and I mean this as a sincere compliment, a lot of our movies here are weird. And because of that, you look at the movies that get nominated, and it's sort of a toss-up of what weird movies are they going to go for. Like some of these are very straightforward, dramas that you'd expect. Quote unquote Canadian version of Oscar bait, as you sort of mentioned, however you want to define that. But then you have some really, weird and unique stuff. Universal Language, as the fact that it's got 13 nominations is incredible. I love that. This was one of my favorite movies from last year. Is a very odd movie just on the surface. The Shrouds is a very weird movie. And then some of the other ones that we were talking about as well that we thought might be players are weird films. There's a lot of science fiction, horror genre type of movies that are made in Canada, and I love that that's the case, but you never really know how that's going to turn out in awards fashion, because we know we can pretty much ignore horror movies from the Oscars. This year, the fact that The Substance was even nominated for so many awards and won an award was a huge victory for the genre upon itself. But it's a lot harder to predict that in the Canadian side of things, because sometimes they really lean into it. And then sometimes, like this year, I sort of feel like they didn't lean as hard into the genre elements.
Yeah, I remember we were briefly talking probably like a week and a half ago now about whether or not 40 Acres would make it in. And my argument was like, the CSAs are very weird, to the point where a few years ago they went real hard for Blood Quantum, which
Yeah.
is like a very it's a really good zombie horror movie, but it is a zombie horror movie. Like, it's very much a genre movie that like wouldn't even be on the Oscars radar. And yet in the Canadian Screen Awards, I don't know exactly how many it got, but it did really well, and it won Best Picture that year. And like, I mean, the reason that it got brought up in relation to 40 Acres is I think 40 Acres is genre wise quite similar and weird in a lot of the same ways. I just don't think it's like as much of I don't think it's as good as Blood Quantum, frankly. But not that I think it's bad. It's just Blood Quantum is actually Blood Quantum is kind of the Everything Everywhere All at Once of the CSAs, in my opinion, because it's like Everything Everywhere All at Once was really weird, but also like it got to a lot of people who in like really specific, almost targeted ways. And I think Blood Quantum kind of does the same thing, while the one weird genre movie that really breaks through. Except that weird genre is always kind of doing all right at the CSAs.
Yeah.
Kind of rambling, but yeah.
Blood Quantum, I did look this up. It won 7 CSAs out of 10 nominations. It did not win. It wasn't even nominated for Best Picture, which is crazy.
Wait, was it not? I thought it won Best Picture.
It was not nominated. God. Yeah, it was not nominated for either picture or director, yet still somehow won 7 awards.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's actually a lot more like The Shrouds, which this year is nominated for 9 awards and not nominated for Best Picture or Director, actually.
Yeah, and looking at it, none of the performance is as well, which is very shocking. Let's talk about the performances, because they break this up into both comedy and drama, and then they don't do gendered awards. They do Best Lead, Drama, and Comedy, and Best Supporting Drama and Comedy. So there are, if I'm remembering, yes, there's 8 nominees per category. So that is 32 performances that are nominated. And honestly, it's kind of all over the place, and missing a ton of really huge performances that I thought were locks. And it's always weird, because it seems like 2 or 3 films kind of take up a bulk of the nominations in the performance, and they don't show up anywhere else. And then the other movies you expect to be there sort of get completely shut out. So I'm not going to name all of the performances that were nominated, but yeah, like Best Leading Performance in a Drama, the most notable one is Sebastian Stan in The Apprentice. After that, and Britt Lower in Darkest Miriam. After that, it's sort of a little bit surprising of what else is there. We've got 2 other Best Picture nominees in Village Keeper and Gamma Rays, but the other 4 nominees are movies I'm not even familiar with.
Carrie-Anne Moss is nominated for Die Alone, and Sean Dalton is nominated for Skeet, and those movies are not nominated for anything else.
Yeah, like, confusing. Like, nothing wrong with that. Like, I'm glad that they're able to spread the love. Like, maybe Carrie-Anne Moss, Trinity of All of Our Hearts, did a great performance, but it's very surprising. Why is this the only nomination that I got here? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And then looking over at performance and a leading role comedy, I'm sure you were very happy that Emily Lee from Paying for It got a nomination, but Dan Byrne, I don't know how to say his name, missed here, which is very surprising. And then we've got Cate Blanchett in Rumors, which is like great for her, but like where are the other people from Rumors going on?
Well, Roy Dupuis is here. He's in supporting, but he's in supporting. Right, and that was the big prediction that I made in our predictions. Like, I didn't remember any names, because of course not. But in our predictions, I was like, Roy Dupuis, he'll be there.
Yeah,
and he is.
Yeah. So overall, the performance nominations are tripping me up the most, because like you mentioned, there's so many categories, and frankly, I'm not complaining. Like, how many of these categories have you heard people on the internet or in real life say, oh man, I wish the Oscars had a stunt category. Oh, I wish they had a casting, which the Oscars are introducing a casting category, or, splitting up sound design and sound mixing. That used to be a thing. hair and makeup. They're two completely different things. Why are they connected into one? They should be recognized separately. So I love the fact that the Canadian Screen Awards takes the time to acknowledge so many different facets of filmmaking. And so that, of course, will lead to a lot of one-off films getting nominations. But yeah, I'm just baffled by a lot of these performance nominations.
Yeah, especially like it's weird because you can't even say like all of the performance nominations are one-offs because there's a few one-offs in there, and then like look at best performance in a supporting role drama is dominated by Village Keeper.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like occasionally, you know, there's it's just all over the place. It's very eclectic. It is something I really like about the CSAs, but also makes it, impossible to predict anything.
Yeah, I completely agree. And then looking at Universal Language, it has 5 acting nominations between lead and supporting. That's crazy. I love that movie, but that's crazy.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing where I think like when people are when there's Oscar campaigns, I get the feeling that people really really try to avoid doing that for
Hmm.
fear that like you'll split the votes. But I don't know if that's even a problem at the CSAs because Blackberry last year had more nominations than anything's ever had at the CSAs, and pretty much everything there was a clear lock. Like Matt Johnson was nominated for Best Supporting Actor, he wasn't getting it over Glenn Howerton. I don't think there's any danger of them splitting the votes or anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So it's going to be interesting to see if that does occur. And like sort of comparing this to the Oscars, looking at something like Conclave, where there was a lot of talk of who among them might get a supporting actor nomination because there's so many great performances in that film, and wondering if they should maybe coalesce around one of them, whether it was, John Lithgow, Stanley Tucci, or I can't remember his name, the actor that played Cardinal Tedesco, or the the cardinal that eventually becomes a pope. I can't remember his name either. I'm blanking on all the stuff right now. And so there's this idea of like, should they be worried about vote
Carlos
splitting?
Diaz, was that his
Yes,
name?
Carlos Dietz.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you look at like this that you're talking about, Village Keeper and Universal Language and Diener 89. They sort of are taking up a bulk of these nominations, and so it's just very surprising.
Yeah, they're just it kind of looks like, no offense to anyone in Universal Language, but it kind of looks like they just threw out nominations at that thing, which is kind of cool. But Danielle Fichot getting nominated alongside Mani Suleimanlu and Saba Vahed Yousefi, that's a lot, and that's just supporting actors. It does speak a lot to sort of how multifaceted that movie is. It's just such a weird one that like it does make sense to highlight all of these supporting performances, but it's also there's no one feels any need to coalesce around one person here. Clearly,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want to bring it back a little bit to Best Director. And it's sort of interesting how we've got Adam McGoyan in here for Seven Veils, yet Seven Veils didn't get a Best Picture nomination. Looking at the other ones, 1, 2, 3, there's 4 overlap with Best Picture and 2 that don't. One for a film that I'm also not familiar with, Lorangan FYT. The director Arabal was not nominated in Best Picture either. So
she also wasn't. That movie also wasn't nominated anywhere else. This appears
really,
exclusively in director.
that's crazy. Wow. Yeah. So both The Apprentice and what is it, Village Keeper miss out on Best Director. So yeah, I I don't know what to make of that.
Yeah, I'd have to rewatch Darkest Miriam, but like I'm not sure what they're the Darkest Miriam, Seven Veils, and Universal Language. I've seen all three of those, and that's um, in direction. Those are the only three that I've seen in direction, and like they're all very very well directed, very very different. I'm a little surprised Adam McGoyan doesn't show up anywhere else. Well, doesn't show up in as many more places as I think he could have, but I forgot where I was going with this. They're very, very well directed movies, very, very different. So I'm excited, I guess, for Gamma Rays, Lurunjan, FYT, and Who Do I Belong To? Because um, there's clearly no singular style they're going for in directing, because the three I've seen are wildly differently directed movies.
Mm-hmm. Were there any other movies before we sort of get into, we're going to do our favorite nominations, snubs, and movies we want to see in just after this, but are there any other movies that you were sort of expecting to show up and didn't at all?
Well, one specifically, which is Sugarcane in
Oh, yeah.
documentary, didn't show up at all. And I cannot fathom how that could have happened unless Sugarcane is somehow not eligible. Now, I don't know how it wouldn't be eligible, but like in terms of Canadian documentaries, I feel like that has got to be the one this year for me personally. And like, I just don't see how it could have missed everything. So I don't know. That's the one that I was like really shocked to not see here at all.
Yeah, I just double checked just because I know when we were recording our predictions, we missed that Seven Veils made the Canada top 10 list 2 years ago. And I was just double checking. Sugarcane wasn't nominated 2 years ago, so I don't know what it was. The fact that it managed to get an Oscar nomination and missed the radar completely of voters, especially considering how many documentary categories. It's not like there's just one, best documentary feature that it was eligible for. No, it could have been in cinematography or direction, there's a whole bunch of documentary categories. I have no idea why Sugarcane missed it. So it's very confusing. And like, I know you said you've read the rules before for eligibility, but I wonder if there's like a bigger, thicker list of what the qualifications are for people who are members to sort of see what the actual period is, what counts as Canadian, because it has to be a certain amount produced by Canadian funds, things like that we're probably just not aware of. And I'm guessing the fact that we just don't have a list of everything that is eligible probably hurts us in trying to predict things.
Well, and also like not only that, I mean, we've both seen it. I think that is a very important and importantly Canadian documentary because it is actively about a Canadian political issue that is very, very, very current. So, like, that's why, even beyond just being a good documentary that released last year, that's why I'm surprised it didn't show up here. Because, like, when you're looking at any any awards body that nominates documentaries for anything, I always do kind of expect, big important documentaries, big important thematically important documentaries to show up, and like it doesn't get bigger and more thematically important than Sugarcane, in my opinion. But I don't know.
Yeah. So yeah, as I sort of teased earlier, we are going to name some of our thoughts, our top 5 favorite nominations, top 5 snubs, and top 5 movies that we now want to see. So let's go with our top 5 favorite nominations. We have not shared our list with each other, so there might be some overlap. I don't know. I tried to pick ones that I feel like, not avoiding ones that you would talk about, but ones that I think are more unique to me. So I'll go through my nominations, and you can kind of give me your thoughts on them. So my favorite nominations are Young Werther for cinematography. This was a movie I really, really liked, and this is the only time it pops up at the CSAs, and I'm definitely sad that this is the only one it got, but it is also very well deserving, so I'm happy it's there. Shepherds, which was probably one of my favorite Canadian films, along with Universal Language, getting in for adapted screenplay. I didn't realize that this movie was based on a book. At the very end, throughout the movie, this main character is writing a diary talking about how he eventually wants to write a shepherding handbook. And in the end, you realize that no, he actually did, and this movie is based on that hand guide. So I really love the way they handled that. In a Violent Nature, it was nominated for both sound mixing and sound editing. You can pick which nomination you like. I like both, and so I'm just going to combine it for sound here. Love this horror movie. I thought it did a great job using sound to its advantage, and one that I think is very well deserved, and I would love to see a win in either of those categories for it. rumors for casting. We talked about both Cate Blanchett and Roy Dupuis for getting nominations here, but I think overall, this entire G7 group, their casting is all spot on and has some really great character actors playing the world leaders from all these different countries. Yeah, specifically, Cate Blanchett and Roy Dupuis are fantastic, but I just want to highlight the fact that I'm happy that the entire cast gets nominated here by the casting director. And then lastly, Seven Veils for Adam McGoyan directing. I thought this was such a singular vision. The fact that Adam McGoyan tied in his own direction of the opera Salome that this movie is based around. So he's using his direction of the opera to make a movie that is somehow related both to that opera and its own thing, while also looking back on a previous performance of Salome from back in the early 2000s. I think it's just fantastic. And Adam McGoyan, this is my favorite movie of his so far. So what are your thoughts on my 5 favorite nominations here?
I'm gonna try and remember them all in order because I have thoughts on literally every one of them.
Okay.
Actually, I love your picks, by the way. So like these
Amazing.
aren't bad thoughts. These aren't bad thoughts. Young Werther, it's one that I had never like connected it in my head with great cinematography specifically, but thinking back on it, it really does have great cinematography. And what I especially really love about two of the picks, like two of the things in the cinematography category here, Paying for It and Young Werther, they're clearly made by people who really, really love Toronto.
Yes.
And have gone out of their way to not depict the city as a character the way that typically means. Like, Toronto is not a character the same way Gotham City is a character in Batman. But they're really like trying to capture specific moments in Toronto's history, and like if this city means anything to you, you look at it, you recognize it, you go, wow, that is exactly what that building is for. I know that place. And like it's not just, me recognizing things I can walk to, but it's really capturing it in a way that you can tell that there's a lot of love for these locations. That I think really comes across in Young Werther and Paying for It. Young Werther with a very modern lens, and Paying for It with a bit of a nostalgic lens. And I think that really comes across in the cinematography specifically. So like I am very happy to see it here the more I think about it. Shepherds, I think what's really cool about it is I believe that Matthias Lefebvre is the person that the character is based on in Shepherds. So he's actually nominated here for a CSA for adapting his own work alongside Sophie Duraspe. I could be wrong, but I do believe that is the case. So I always like stuff like that where actually this reminds me in a weird way a little bit of Scott Pilgrim. Scott Pilgrim came out as a comic first in the early 2000s and then came out as a movie before the comic finished. The ending and the reception to the movie changed the ending of the comic. And now, recently, like I think 10, maybe 12 years after the movie, there was a new TV show that just adapted the same story. And what I liked about each of those adaptations was that it's the same story being told by the same guy differently, reflecting on himself at different points of his life. And I think that that's really cool that if I am in fact correct about Matthias Lefebvre being the person that the story is about, I think it's cool that he got the opportunity to do that and like reflect on what this has meant to him or what that meant to him, 20 years later or however long it was ago that Shepherds took place.
Yeah.
What was your third category again?
In a Violent Nature for sound.
In a Violent Nature. Yes, it uses In a Violent Nature is something I was definitely expecting to break through in a lot more technical categories than it ultimately did. But I'm really glad it got the 2 that it did, or at least that it got 2 at all, because you're right. I think it uses that sound really effectively. It's such a unique horror movie, and I really hope that people can check it out because it's like a vaporwave slasher, and I think that it like I think that it uses that sound really effectively for it. So it's cool that it's here. I wish it had broken through in more, but it's cool that it's here. And Was that 4? Was that 3? What was
That
your?
was 3. Rumors for casting was next.
Yes, rumors for casting. My favorite part of that casting. I mean, Roy Dupuis and Kate Blanchett are my favorite part of that casting. The next thing, I think it's so brilliant, like the little idiosyncrasies they bring in that are just that like make you wonder about them, but they just don't address them properly. Like
Yeah.
Charles Dance is the president of the United States, and he doesn't put on an American accent or anything. He puts on
No.
like an American affect, but he's very clearly British. And I think it comes up one time briefly, but he's really
Hmm.
sleepy. So like someone asks, "Hey, aren't you British? Why are you the president of the United States?" And he's like, "I'm very sleepy. I need to sit down."
Well, he
Something
starts
like
to
that.
explain it, and then they get interrupted by the bog people, and so he stops it. He's like, "Well, it's an interesting story. Oh, look at what's happening."
Right.
And
Yeah,
so
I
it's like they
remember it,
acknowledge it, but they don't acknowledge it.
and I love that. It's just the movie Rumors is like it's a really funny satire, and I think that like I don't know, it didn't work for some people, but I think that I think that part of the reason I think it really worked for me, and at least part of that reason is that it's a very Canadian satire. Like I don't know how to explain that properly except just that Roy Dupuis is playing a version of Justin Trudeau that I do not think that an American writer director could come up with. I think
No.
that that's a very like you have to have lived Justin Trudeau for 10 years to be able to write a satire like a parody of Justin Trudeau that's that spot on in those ways.
Hmm.
Um, and then I'm really glad that you said Adam
Adam
McGowan
Egoyan.
for director because that opens me up to say something slightly different. Which I'll hold back my thoughts on that for a moment.
Great. Okay. Well, then, what were your top 5 favorite nominations?
So number 5, Okurimono for best cinematography in a feature-length documentary. We didn't mention it earlier, but Okurimono is actually one of the most nominated films at the Canadian Screen Awards, and it is a documentary, which means it is only eligible for documentary categories. The fact that it still got 5 basically means it was nominated for everything it was eligible for, which is super impressive. Um, it's a really cool documentary about a Japanese woman who lives in Montreal, I believe, going back to after her. I saw this almost a year ago, and I'm trying to remember what it's about, so I might get some of the details wrong. She goes back to her father's house in somewhere in Japan. I don't remember the exact place that it was. To pack it up, basically. And while she's there, she interviews along with the director Laurence Lefebvre, I want to say. She interviews people who lived through the Second World War, just sort of about their experience, and it's um, really it's a really tough documentary to watch, actually. But it is also a really, really beautiful documentary in a lot of ways, not the least of which is the cinematography. Because I had to really probe, I can't remember any quotes from the movie. I really got to watch it again because it is very good. But one thing I can remember is all of the beautiful shots of the Japanese town that she goes to and the countryside. And it is just a gorgeous looking movie and also one that I don't know how this released, if it did release. I saw it at Hot Docs, and I wish it had gotten a little more of a bigger release because it's a very interesting, really hard hitting documentary about something that it feels like something that people have must have made documentaries about before, but I've never seen it. Just but so I don't know. I need to watch it again before I can give a proper like uh before I can really effectively hype up this movie. But I do think everyone should see it, and it's the most nominated documentary here. So lots of reasons. Number 4, Piruz Namadi for performance in a leading role comedy for Universal Language. I'm really happy that this breaks through as leading role. I would also describe it that way, but Universal Language is such a weird movie that like it's one of those with such a weird movie with such a big cast that, it's one of those where if it were competing for the Oscars, probably they'd just run everyone as supporting. I'm really glad he's running as lead here. And, again, super weird movie. He's got one of the weirdest roles. And I think it's really cool that he's in there. I hope he's a front runner, but I don't even know how to predict that because I would love to see him win that. Number 3, Britt Lauer for a performance in a leading role drama for Darkest Miriam. I think that, once again, Darkest Miriam, crazy weird movie. Britt Lauer's performance in that, very strange. And like one that I've been thinking about Darkest Miriam at least a little bit and just how to process that movie since I saw it back at Fantasia. And Britt Lauer's performance specifically is something that constantly sticks with me. It's such a weird and unique take on a depressed person. I think it's like a very weird take. It's not like the director came up to her and is like, you are playing someone who is depressed. There's so much nuance to it that it really sticks with you. In my case, 6 months after I saw it the first time, and I haven't seen it since. I've only watched it the one time. Number 2, achievement in music nominations for I Don't Know Who You Are. This is nominated for Best Original Score and Best Original Song. And I think that's really cool. It's got great music. It is about a musician. Once again, a very hard to watch movie that hits really hard. And I think that, it's about a musician. So there's a lot of music. It's all very good music. I'm glad that it's being recognized here. And my number 1 favorite nomination here is also Adam Egoyan, but specifically for Best Adapted Screenplay. So I'm glad you said director, because I think that Adam Egoyan's screenplay here for Seven Veils, it's meta, which is kind of cool, but it's also it's kind of an adaptation of Salome, and more an adaptation of his specific experience creating his version of Salome, which is just such a weird way to adapt a screenplay and such an inventive way to do that. I think I've talked about it on Oscars episodes with you. When I'm thinking of adapted screenplay, I always want to think about how the adaptation actually happened. What is the, not just best screenplay that was adapted, best adaptation. And I think that this is a really unique adaptation of this story. So I'm really happy he's in adapted screenplay for this.
Nice. Yeah, I've only seen 2 of the movies that you're talking about, so I can only talk about Universal Language, Best Leading Performance in a Comedy. I completely agree. Pyros Nemeti does have, if you were to call any one of the characters in it, he probably has the biggest part, which is tough because it's not quite an anthology type of movie, but there's clearly chapters where not all the characters overlap in different stories, but he probably has the most screen time out of anyone. And he's terrific as this tour guide of Winnipeg, basically, is in a nutshell. Really funny with some great heartfelt moments. So I'm happy you mentioned that there. And then, of course, Adam Egoyan for this screenplay. Yeah, I sort of talked about for what he did in director. And I don't think you can separate his directing contributions from his writing contributions because they're so clearly intertwined with his experience and his take on this story.
Yeah, in my doc, I have Adam Egoyan in adapted screenplay and director, so that's why I'm glad you said director.
All right, well, let's move on to our top 5 snubs. We don't want to be super negative, but here's some stuff that we would have loved to have seen. So my first one, I'm going to bring it back to Seven Veils, and that's Amanda Seyfried. She is absolutely terrific. She is in almost every frame of this movie except for when there's flashbacks and a couple other moments where some other characters we see what's happening with them. She absolutely crushes this lead role as the director of this opera production when she is not an experienced opera director, and her dealing with the sort of grief of the passing of her mentor while also dealing with the trauma that he may have inflicted upon her, along with the not so great childhood she had, and going through a separation from her husband. So she's got a lot going on, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff here that she does. I love this performance. And then I'm going to mention a second performance, and that's Shepherds for Félix Antoine Duval, who is the lead character who plays the shepherd in question in this film. I've already talked about this movie several times. I really loved it. It's absolutely stunning, and he does a great job of this really like bright-eyed, eager young man who wants to learn how to be a shepherd in France, and becoming disillusioned, and then ultimately finding his peace in the world and what his role is in regards to the shepherding ecosystem. He does a great job. Young Werther, I'm going to mention this again. Adapted screenplay. I really wish it showed up there. This is a screenplay that is written by the director Josie Avellino, Gilles Corbett Lourenco, based on a classic novel by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. And he does a great job of sort of keeping the integrity of this really classic German story, romantic story, where the main character, Werther, played by Douglas Booth, feels like he's in this world still. He dresses like he's in this world. He talks like he's in this, whatever era of Germany this comes from. And everyone else is sort of like, look at this kooky, quirky guy. But we kind of like his vibe. And Jose does a great job sort of blending the old with the new and keeping it very fresh and entertaining. Another movie that got completely shut out was Inedia. I really like this film, and I wish it got nomination for cinematography. I believe it was shot on film. It looks stunning, showcasing a island off the coast of Victoria, off of Vancouver Island, and it looks really great. They do a great job. This is sort of about a wellness cult that believes that they can fast and only receive nourishment from the sun, which is the act of Inedia. Very interesting, odd movie, and not what you would expect from a woman entering a cult and sort of revealing its dark secrets. And then lastly is The Silent Planet, which I believe it only got one nomination, if I'm remembering. Yeah, one nomination for its score, which I thought was very good, but I wish it got nominated for art direction. I thought the look and feel of this isolated planet where they send prisoners for the rest of their sentence to basically work as miners. It's both futuristic while also being very rustic, so I think they did a great job with that, and we'll have love for that to show up there. Do you have any thoughts on my nominations here, Jeff?
Well, I haven't seen all of them, but Young Werther, I absolutely agree. I think, once again, I'm not going to harp on it because I already kind of said it about Adam Agoyan, but I think that that's a really good example of adapting a story, not just a story that has, not just a screenplay that is based on something else, but really diving into what that story is and putting a new twist on it.
It almost feels like a good Shakespeare adaptation where the director finds a new angle to look at.
Exactly. And I think I think that Young Werther really, really pulled that off. Inedia, unfortunately, I haven't seen, though you've gotten me very interested. Unfortunately, that does not seem to be on VOD that I can see, so I will have to hope that it's coming through for, we've got Canadian Film Day and Canadian Film Week sometime in the next little bit here, so hopefully that'll be here. The Silent Planet, unfortunately, also I haven't seen. I remember you praising it pretty highly in from Fantasia, and yeah, I absolutely couldn't agree more about Seven Veils. Why am I forgetting?
Shepherds
and Seven Veils performances by, can you repeat the names, please?
Amanda Seyfried and Félix Antoine Duval.
Thank you so much. And Félix Antoine Duval, I did just check after you brought him up. He is playing Matthias, who is the person who wrote the book and helped adapt the screenplay. So Matthias is very well represented here, but not through Félix, unfortunately.
Yeah. And then the last one was Silent Planet. Did you catch that one?
I unfortunately didn't, but I think it's one I will be able to see before the awards. So it's one I'm gonna hopefully catch up on.
Nice. Yeah, I think you'd like that one. Well, what are your snubs?
Well, my two favorite Canadian films of the year were Paying for It and Seven Veils, neither of which is represented in Best Motion Picture. I really would have liked to see them there, and I don't. I'm glad that they did get a good number of nominations, but I would have liked to see them in Best Motion Picture. I'm a little surprised. I think I said it uh, in our um, in our predictions. I said I would actually be surprised. I'd actually be shocked to see not to see the leads of Matt and Mara show up in performance. And guess what? I'm shocked. They're not there. I'm very surprised by that, and I think they both deserve to be there, but unfortunately they aren't. Which Matt Johnson and the name of Mara escapes me, but both Canadian actors that will get their shot at the CSAs again, probably sooner rather than later. So it's there's good nominees there. It's just I'm a little surprised that such a performance heavy film didn't get anything for the performances. I
Yeah.
already talked about this, but Sugarcane being completely shut out really boggles the mind. Um, for In a Violent Nature, I really thought that it would be a shoe in for cinematography because that is what stood out the most to me of that movie. But it's not there, and I'm a little sad by that. I really wish it would have been because I'm glad about the nominations it got. I think it uses sound really well, but to me, the cinematography was the real star of the movie, and unfortunately, not represented. And then my number one snub, I think we did already mention him, Dan Byrne in performance in a leading role comedy for Paying for It. I think that movie, I think that Emily Lee is extremely good in that movie, and I really like how Paying for It uses that sort of brings another. I've read the book as well now, and I think that Emily Lee brings a really important perspective to the movie that isn't there in the book, but the perspective from the book is so beautifully represented through Dan Byrne's performance here, and I think it's a real shame that he's not in there. Because I mean, it would be two leads from the same film competing against each other, but like best. All the performance categories have multiple people from the same film, so it's not like that would be weird.
Yeah, I agree with you. You had been lauding Paying for It for all year ever since you saw it, and I finally caught up with it somewhat recently, and yeah, it's great. And so yeah, I'm shocked it wasn't in Best Picture as well or Dan Byrne. I really liked him in the 20th Century, Matthew
Mm-hmm.
Rankin's previous film, where he plays the Prime Minister of Canada in a kooky role, and so I was really excited to see him again. So I like that. Yeah, you're completely right about In a Violent Nature. The cinematography was the real star of that, especially considering this aspect of what if it was Friday the 13th solely from the perspective of Jason. That's basically what In a Violent Nature is, if you're to boil
Mm-hmm.
it down. And seeing this whole, we've all seen, comedic takes on, the serial killer waiting behind the curtains, waiting for someone to show up, and they fall asleep, and then they wake up when the person comes in. We've all seen those hilarious little sketches, but this is done in a very dramatic, scary way of what is it like with a killing monster who is willing to wait for the right opportunity to attack, and it is frightening stuff, and it's so beautiful. So yeah, Sugarcane for documentary as well. Literally any of the documentary categories, I agree. I haven't caught up with Matt and Mara yet, so I can't comment on either Matt Johnson or DeRay Campbell's performance. But yeah, I think you have some solid snubs here where I would have loved to have seen most of that as well.
And just one more note on In a Violent Nature. The lead is played by, I want to say, the lead performer in that, I believe, is Rye Barrett, is his name. And because
Yeah.
he's, a monstrous killer, he doesn't. He doesn't speak. He doesn't have any speaking roles. So the cinematography does a lot of heavy lifting to really get you into his head. And when I saw it, I was lucky enough to see uh, to have a lot of the cast and crew there as well, and they did a Q&A afterwards, and just hearing about process of all the technicals behind the scenes. Like the cinematographer did a lot of work to make sure that you get inside this character's head through the cinematography, and like to really choreograph the entire movie around how it has to look. Now, not that the sound designers did any less work. They also did a really impressive job. And they talked about it there, where they went into some of the details of how they did the sound. It's just a really technically impressive movie. And,
Mm-hmm.
I would have put it in a lot of different technical categories, but there's a lot of movies,
Yeah.
74. So
I completely agree with you. Okay, and now our last sort of fun category is what's your homework? So my top 5 movies that I now want to see that got nominations. My number 1 is Diener 89, which has 7 nominations. Darkest Miriam, which has 6 nominations. Sharp Corner, which played at TIFF and was on my radar that I ended up missing, has 3 nominations. Mad and Mar, I just mentioned that I haven't seen it yet, so I got to see that. Just 3 nominations. And then the last one is Backspot, which is a gymnastics film starring DeVry Jacobs from Reservation Dogs, which has 2 nominations I really want to see. So what are your films that you now want to see, Jeff?
well, there's a lot more than 5, but I am going to limit myself to 5.
Yes.
Yeah. Also, Diener 89. I'm glad I have an excuse to see this one. Not that I necessarily needed one, but my dad, like 2 or 3 years ago, just out of the blue, recommended the movies Fubar and whatever the second one is called, which I think is just Fubar 2,
Mm-hmm.
on Netflix. And I never got around to them, but now I need to, because Diener 89 is a spin-off of those movies. I think I can watch Diener 89 alone, so I'm probably going to watch that one first and then watch the other two. But like, I watched all of Ricardo Trogi's movies leading up to 1995, so I could watch that one. So you know, I'm going to do the homework there at some point. Sharp Corner, which was also one that was already on my radar, and like I just haven't had the opportunity. It wasn't on my radar at TIFF, which I wish it had been, because I don't know where I will have the opportunity to see it after that. But hopefully it'll be out in some manner soon. But already one I was super excited about. Humane, Caitlin Cronenberg's movie. I think it's up for 4 awards this year, and it was already one that was on my radar because it's a Cronenberg. So I got to see that. I'm actually watching that tonight, so that'll be off my list by the end of the night. Disco's Revenge, which I think only is up for 2 awards, but looks really cool, and it has Nile Rodgers in it. So like, a documentary about disco with Nile Rodgers, I want to see that.
Mm-hmm.
And The Invisibles, which I believe is up for, it's a small number of awards. I can't remember if it's 2 or 3, but it's got a really fun little promotional image on the Canadian Academy. So I see that and I'm like, I wonder what that's about. Why is Tim Blake Nelson sad? So let's find out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have a couple overlaps there. I've already seen Humane. It's interesting. I think there's some really interesting stuff going on in there. Disco's Revenge was one that also sort of caught my eye too as a potential documentary to check out. So yeah, those are some really solid films that we have to check out. And like I said at the beginning, we will be doing a post recap. So this wraps up this episode. So after the CSAs will happen, we'll recap the big winners and losers of the June 1st gala. And you can check out Jeff's masterful letterbox list in the show notes, where you can see every film nominated and for what awards if you click the little See Notes button. Also, I will make sure to put together a list of all of the CSA nominated film reviews that I have published on the website, which several of the ones we've talked about have already been there. And I know now that the nominations have come out, a bunch of people have been asking me about where they can review different films. So there's going to be several more, I hope. But this past week on ContraZoomPod.com, we posted reviews of Julie Keeps Quiet by Ryan Bopit, The Penguin Lessons by Elisa Brenner, and a Blu-ray review of Wolfman by you yourself, Jeff Bulmer.
Oh, that was a fun one too.
Yeah, these will all be listed in the show notes so that way you can read. And I've also printed some new stickers, this time with the graphic from the best films of the decade so far, made by friend of the show, Crystal Tapia. And if you would like one, send me a screenshot of you rating or reviewing the show, and I will mail you some for free. Jeff, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Where can people find more of your work?
Well, right. So generally speaking, I run a show called Classic Movies Live, which is on Spotify. We have been on hiatus this month, and hopefully we'll be coming back soon. We might want to try and make a few changes this year, but we still haven't really had the opportunity to get together and talk about it. So we'll be back soon, and we've got really exciting things planned. But obviously those aren't happening yet. But you will know when they are if you check us out on Spotify at Classic Movies Live, or stay tuned into my Twitter at UBCOCML, where at least recently, mostly I've just been retweeting movie news, but occasionally I'll say like a funny joke, and it'll get one like. And if it could get 2 likes, that would make my entire day.
If I was still on Twitter, I would give you those likes. I promise.
Thank you. It means a lot that you said that.
This has been a That Shelf podcast. Visit thatshelf.com for more great film discourse. Follow the show on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky at ContraZoomPod. What are your thoughts on the Canadian Screen Awards? Leave a comment on Spotify or send us an email. Thank you to Eric and Kevin Smale for the theme music and to Stephanie Pryor for the logo design. If you like to listen to podcasts on YouTube, we do post all episodes there as well. And if you really like the show, consider tipping us on coffee. Thanks for checking us out.